This is Ira Gorlick, and this lecture is on economies of scale. So economies of scale is very important when we talk about monopolies, and it's very important when we talk about telecommunications because, as I often say, telecommunications is an economies of scale business. So there exists a thing called a minimum efficient scale, what's called MES. And it's the lowest level of output at which all scale economies are exploited. So if the minimum efficient scale is only achieved when output is relatively high, it's likely that very few firms will be able to compete in the market. Natural monopoly is when the minimum efficient scale can only be achieved when one firm has exploited the majority of economics of scale available. Then no more firms can enter the market. So let me go into 3 reasons for economies of scale. The first reason is the good or service at issue requires a very large fixed expense that must be incurred no matter how many units are sold. As the firm increases production, these fixed costs can be spread over an ever larger number of units of output, reducing the per unit average. And the telephone system has long been considered to fit into this pattern. You have to build in a large network in order to serve a large community. A telephone company must build its network of wires, purchase switching machinery, create databases, and hire personnel before it can transmit its first call. The company recovers that investment by factoring a share of these fixed costs into the retail price of telephone service. With each new subscriber, the phone company can further spread its fixed cost and thereby allocate a lower proportion of those costs to each customer. The cost of each individual's phone service thus declines as the number of callers on the network increases. And I used the example earlier about the cost for a bill. If I have to buy a billing system and I only can spread that cost out to 10 people, it's going to cost more, obviously, than if I can spread it out to 1 million people. Same billing system, but my cost per bill will go down as I put more people on that billing system. So the first reason for economies of scale is that there has to be a large fixed expense, of which the telecommunications industry fits that. The second reason is a firm that has already covered its fixed cost, or that has few fixed costs to begin with, might still have incremental costs of production that decline as output increases. So we see that same thing again in telecommunications. In this case, the firm is not gaining a cost advantage by spreading its fixed cost over more thinly, but instead is gaining a cost advantage by experiencing reduced variable costs for each successive unit of output. This kind of increasing returns of scale could arise for a number of reasons. Machinery might become more fuel and labor efficient when operated at higher capacities. Marginal costs may decline as the workforce becomes more experienced. Such increasing returns will not often occur over very broad ranges of output and will therefore rarely be sufficient to lead to a natural monopoly. But it bears considering the theoretical possibility that a natural monopoly could arise even if fixed costs are not substantial. And the third reason, and this reason is going to be mostly involved with maybe electricity, but telecommunications does fit into that, and that's demand variability. In order to achieve adequate electric service, for example, your local electric company must be ready to supply you with a great deal of power at any instant. Having all that idle capacity is expensive. However, since outside of peak times, your electricity needs to be likely modest. The same is true for your neighbor, and her neighbor too, of course. So if each of you were being served by separate firms, those firms would have significant resources invested in idle equipment. By having a single firm serve all of you, however, the cost of providing electricity can be lowered dramatically. You 3 can share at a given amount of excess capacity, putting the equipment at better use, since the variance in each of your demands will to some degree tend to cancel out. And thus you 3 can share some of that excess capacity without any of you experiencing a notable degradation in service. Now, there are things that are not natural monopolies, and we're going to talk about why most manufactured goods cannot be natural monopolies. For a natural monopoly to exist, it is very important that the per unit cost not only be declining, but that they be declining over most of the range of output that a market will demand and can approach zero. For most manufacturing, there's a floor to cost reduction. So I'm going to use auto manufacturing as an example. An automobile maker must build a manufacturing plant, purchase machinery, and install a management system before it can produce its first car. The firm recovers those fixed costs by including a share of them in the price of each car it makes. So the average cost per car decreases as the number of cars produced at the plant increases. Should automobile manufacturing be considered a natural monopoly then? Probably not. First, if a single plant cannot meet the market's entire demand for cars, then the decline in per unit cost will stop before all consumers are served. At that point, the firm would have to build a new plant and incur a new set of fixed costs. In such a case, there is no efficiency gain from having just one firm serve the market, and preventing entry would needlessly sacrifice all the familiar benefits of competition, like lower prices, higher output, better quality, and product innovation. Second, even if a single plant could produce enough cars to satisfy consumer demand, it might still not be the case that the per unit costs are declining over a large enough range of output to make the producer a natural monopoly. Fixed costs might be spread so thinly as to be almost zero on a per unit basis, well before the market's demand has been satisfied. In that case, it might be possible for multiple firms to be in the market without affecting each other's ability to reach the most efficient scale of production. Okay, so this is critical. So you see why automobile manufacturing, most manufacturing is not going to be a natural monopoly, because at some point, well, first of all, in the case of automobile manufacturing, we know one plant can't meet all the demands. So you have to build multiple plants. And so as long as you have to build multiple plants, there's no incentive for only one plant or only one company. That the per unit cost has a floor to it. And as I say, as the second point here, even if one plant could support the entire market, the cost per parts will be in the same position, that there is a floor in terms of the amount of parts. So when we look at natural monopolies, we look at things that can, through more and more use, approach zero. Is cable television, long regulated as a natural monopoly, actually a natural monopoly? There seems little question that the fixed cost of building the cable system are high, no question about that. And the cost per customer of providing cable distribution declines as more households subscribe to the service. Thus, the incremental cost of connecting additional homes to the cable system are very modest and probably constant. So spreading the fixed cost of cable distribution over an increasing number of households reduces the cost per subscriber. And once a complete cable network is in place, there's no good reason to think that the per unit distribution costs decline over the entire range of consumer demand. Entry by a second cable system would therefore raise the average per household cost of providing service. Additionally, we have communities that do not want multiple cables run through their rights of way. At least as far as program distribution, as distinguished from program production, packaging, and marketing is concerned, then, there is at least a plausible argument that cable systems exhibit natural monopoly properties. So now I'm going to get into my bias here. While it may make sense to consider cable a natural monopoly because of economies of scale, as I've pointed out, I think it's better to let the marketplace determine a natural monopoly. New technologies make an additional video distribution in a community competitive. So the community should not give one cable provider a monopoly forever. Let the marketplace decide. I only ask two things here: standards for what constitutes a bad actor, and enough transparency to determine if someone is a bad actor. So the next discussion I'm going to have is on duopolies and oligarchies. Thanks.